Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the second edition of our Checkmat Fallbrook podcast. We came up with a name for it last time. It's called Advancing Your Position. If you guys don't get the reference, it kind of pays homage to one of the big strategies we focus on in jiu-jitsu when we're talking about fighting, is we're always looking to improve the position that we're in. Wherever we are physically on the ground, we're trying to get into a more dominant position. So it's sort of this mentality or approach of taking whatever your current situation is and trying to make it better. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with this podcast series, is give you guys some different looks with different relevant subjects to whatever we're dealing with at particular times, not necessarily fight specific or jiu-jitsu specific, although sometimes it will dig into that a little bit, but to lean on the resources and support of our community, various members of our group, that have some knowledge and insight into some of these subjects that we can all benefit from. So last week we went into talking about a subject that a lot of us are facing for the first time right now, dealing with this homeschooling situation. And like I had said last week, one of the first people I leaned into was somebody who I knew was a full-time homeschool parent who also ran a business and was dealing with some of these same struggles that I was. So I'm kind of hoping by leaning into these resources that we will be able to present something that will be useful to you guys. Because if I'm having these questions, I'm sure a lot of you are having these questions also. So that said, today I don't have an interview person, although I've got a couple of really great ones lined up for the next couple of weeks, because I wanted to talk a little bit about a subject that is pretty relevant to everybody right now. And it's kind of governed my approach to how I'm managing the business and managing life right now. And I know a lot of people are struggling to try to figure out like what's going on and what are we supposed to be doing. For those of you who don't know my background, before I had kind of a life before martial arts and before Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've had a lot of lives. In a past life, I have some pretty extensive crisis management and emergency response management experience, being involved in an operations capacity and then a security capacity at John F. Kennedy Airport in the international terminal. First in an operations function, and then as the security manager for the outsourced security contracting. And a big part of my job was to make sure or to participate in making sure that operations were able to continue during what we called irregular operations, is how it was referred to in the aviation industry. I'm also a pilot. So I have some emergency response planning. When you learn to fly a plane, a lot of what you learn has to do with crisis management, because obviously you're dealing with a situation in the sky where if your plane doesn't work anymore, gravity happens and then you crash, and it's catastrophic, or it can be if you do not react properly. So we're taught, we spend a lot of time in learning to fly a plane and learning how to fly a plane when it doesn't go right. So those two experiences kind of in my past life have lent a lot to my approach to managing a business during a time of very irregular operations, and also just kind of how I manage my life. So that's kind of where I get my background from and my approach to this. So the subject of today's podcast is called Irregular Operations, Managing This Pandemic. What are we doing? I think that's a question that a lot of people have. Like, people are kind of lost about what's going on, and I'm not trying to be an expert and talk about coronavirus and what the risks are, because I'm not a doctor, and I don't think even a lot of doctors know, and I'm not, the president, and I don't know necessarily what the best overall response plan is, and those are things that are out of my hands, and that's not really the focus of what I want to talk about. It's for us as individuals, in whatever our capacity is in our lives. What are we doing during this time of very irregular operations? What should we be focusing on? And how do we approach just a plan to kind of keep us sane through this? So I put together a little PowerPoint for you guys. If you guys are audio only, you won't get to see this, but I'll talk you through it. But I'm going to go ahead and share a screen with you here. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, we now have a Spotify and an iTunes option. So if you're listening there, that's cool. All right, and let's just jump into present here. Okay, so the subject of this podcast today is irregular operations, optimizing pandemic life. Okay, and I got inspired to do this little chat because of this overwhelming attitude I've kind of seen through memes. Not that that's where I get my news, but I think that's generally a fair reflection of the attitude of public in general, society in general. Is when these memes go viral, I think a lot of times they reflect the general attitude and feelings that we have as a society. And it went from just, there's been a lot of panic and chaos reflected, and people just kind of resigned to, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And there's a lot of uncertainty and worry right now. And all those things are absolutely valid. I don't want to discount that or undermine anything anybody's feeling. We're not talking about feelings. We're talking about an approach. And I'm hoping that by applying a reasoned and logical approach to what you're doing in your everyday life, it will help assuage some of those fears a little bit and allow you to control a situation that is not necessarily 100% in your control, or at least have a reasoned approach to dealing with these factors. Kind of know what to do when it happens. Here in California, for instance, we're used to fires. Not that fires are a good thing. Definitely things get shut down because of fires. There's danger because of fires, but it's kind of a known thing for us at this point, and we know what to do. We kind of know how to operate in those types of situations. We're dealing with a pandemic, and this is a situation that in my lifetime, I mean, we had, bird flu and swine flu and all that. We've never had a pandemic to the degree that we are dealing with right now. So I don't think there's really a blueprint for shutting down the economy like this. I mean, I've lived through a couple of major disasters in my lifetime. I was around for 9/11. I was a grown-up then. And this is almost, to me, that level of response where this was such a national, I mean, this is a global impact, but that at least had the entire, national impact. And that was the first time we dealt with a lot of first time response things in the wake of 9/11 with shutting down the airspace, and a lot of, security measures that were put in place to deal with an existing threat. I've lived through some natural disasters. One of the last things I was involved in before I left New York was the recovery of Hurricane Sandy, which basically shut down the state, and it was a natural disaster, and it posed all kinds of limitations to supply chain, and not to mention like physical damage to structures and things like that. So we were dealing with, for my local area, a lot of things that we'd never dealt with before. And I'm kind of trying to draw on those experiences and the commonalities of those, plus how we approach irregular operations to come up with this plan of kind of how you approach this. So what are we supposed to be doing? In any kind of irregular operation, the most important thing we need to do is identify what the event is that we're responding to. And one of the things I have seen is people responding in a very broad way to disasters that are not happening. There are responses that are appropriate for a natural disaster type situation, where, for instance, supply chain may be interrupted, domestic supply chains, food supply chains, or water pipes are gone, and all of a sudden, we need to secure water. We're dealing with a pandemic, and that has some very specific threats that revolve around it, and also some very specific things that are not threats related to a pandemic. And we want to make sure that everything we're doing to modify our own daily operations is related to the threat that we're actually dealing with, not panicking and just dealing with threat in general, because that's non-specific and not helpful for us. We need to identify the event. We need to identify and prioritize our normal time goals and responsibilities. What is it that we need? What do we need to be doing? There's things that are being affected right now that are problems, and there are things that are being affected right now that maybe aren't problems for us. So it's important that we identify what it is that we need to accomplish. What are we usually accomplishing in our daily lives? What of those things are priorities for us to be accomplishing right now? And that way we can focus our attention accordingly in order of priority to make sure that we're doing the best we can with what we have. We need to identify if and how the particular event is affecting our ability to meet those goals and responsibilities. Okay, a key thing that I'm going to use as an example here, and we'll dig into this a little bit more in a bit, is work. Work is something a lot of people are freaking out about right now because they've been laid off. Their businesses have been closed. The event, depending on what it is that you do for a living, what your source of income is, has affected people's ability to meet their goal of making a living. That isn't the case across the board. So this is very specific to your circumstance, and you have to understand how the specific event is affecting your specific circumstances. There are certain jobs right now that are not in danger at all. They're in extremely high demand. If you're a healthcare worker, your concern about having an income is probably not on the top of your list. You may have other concerns that are significant. But the point is, this is going to be different for every person. So you need to identify for yourself how the event that we're dealing with is affecting your specific ability to meet your specific goals and responsibilities. Once we've identified those things, then we need to create new plans for the duration of the event to achieve those goals to the best that we can. Okay, these are bridge plans. They're temporary. They're created with the idea in mind that we're going to transition back to normal operations at the end, and then identify the resources and support available to help us achieve those goals. Okay, if it's an income, it may mean pivoting to a different source of income right now. And we'll get into the specifics about that in a little bit. Okay, and it's important, and I'm going to reiterate this at the end. It's not about maybe same, okay? If you normally make $10,000 a month, maybe we're not going to be able to recreate something in the interim where we're going to earn dollar for dollar $10,000 a month. I don't know what your specific situation is, but we have an objective of being able to support our family. So we need to come up with an operating plan in the interim that's going to be able to meet that goal. The goal doesn't have to be the specific how we did what we do. It's just doing what we do and be results oriented. It doesn't have to be process oriented, but results oriented. Creating transition plans back to normal operations when able. This is a big one, and it's really easy to get lost into scrambling to manage the current crisis and then forgetting that it's going to end and not putting ourselves in a position to make a smooth transition back into normal life. And we want to basically take this time right now to identify the cues and benchmarks that we're going to use for when do we get out of crisis mode and when do we go back to like normal operating mode again, so we can plan for those things and be ready to jump on them when they become available to us. And the last thing, this is something that people have been sort of echoing also, which I do like, is this idea of silver linings, okay? Identify opportunities the event affords and figure out a plan to capitalize on them. There's a lot of bad things going on right now. There's a lot of things that are negatively impacted, but there are also a lot of cool things that are going on right now as a function of us just not being able to go out and do what we always do, being kicked out of our daily routines and our normal schedules and our normal constraints that we live in our day-to-day life. Because that's been taken away from us, we need to look at what opportunities we have and not miss out on those things while we have the chance. All right, so we're gonna dig into these a little bit deeper. Key themes here. This is a reference to my flying background. Okay, it's fly the plane. It's the first thing we do in every emergency situation, whatever it is. The engine dies. We have, damage to the fuselage. Whatever the case is, you have an emergency. You always have to remember your first and foremost priority is to fly the airplane. Don't stop being a pilot because something bad happened. You have to be a pilot first and then deal with the disaster. And you're gonna deal with the disaster as a pilot, but you don't ever stop flying your plane. So your plane is your life, okay? It's raising your kids. It's earning a living. It's putting a roof over your and your family's head. It is getting an education. It is staying in shape. It's staying healthy. Whatever all of those things are, those are still your goals. That's your airplane. You need to fly it, okay? We're not gonna let the virus take over. We're not gonna let this pandemic take over and fly the plane for us. Then we're just in the back seat going along for a ride, and whatever happens to us, happens to us. And that's not a good approach, okay? 2, stay in your routine. This does not mean necessarily mirroring the exact activities that you were doing before. It means coming up with a way, again, to focus on these things in your life that were part of your life, part of your airplane, okay? If one of those things was going to the gym and staying in shape, maybe you can't go to the gym right now. For us jiu-jitsu people, we can't go to the gym and roll right now, but it's important to stay in the routine of keeping those things that are important to you in your life front and center. If you spend 3 hours a week rolling, 10 hours a week rolling, whatever practitioner you are, okay, keeping jiu-jitsu in your life right now in some capacity is important. And that's been something I've been trying to do as a business owner, to pivot to be able to give that to you guys, trying in a lot of different ways just to keep you guys engaged. Because if jiu-jitsu was something that you sought out and that is important to you in your life, it's important that you still have ways to meet that need, even if it's temporary, even if it's not as good. Okay? If jiu-jitsu is in your life, you need to still be doing jiu-jitsu. Okay? If lifting is in your life, you need to still be doing something to work out. If nutrition and health is important to you, and it should be, okay, that still needs to be part of your life. This is not a reason to sit on the couch and eat gallons and gallons of ice cream every day and feel sorry about the situation that's going on. Don't let the things that are going on take away your control. Don't let that take away your routine. Okay? 3, any plan is better than no plan. Okay? You might not get this right. There are many different aspects of what you're going to be trying to do, and you may not get all of them right. You may not get any of them perfect, and that's okay. Because again, the idea is that doing something with a plan is going to be better than doing nothing at all and just letting things happen to you. Okay? Being proactive versus just not doing anything at all. And the 4th thing is to try to mitigate chaos. Any kind of irregular operation, emergency type situation is always going to promote chaos, and chaos destroys any kind of progress. It makes everything more difficult to deal with. So in any way that we can avoid this chaotic situation, we're going to have a better overall outcome and result than if we just allow things to happen. And that kind of goes back to the first 3 things: flying the plane, staying in your routine. Any plan is better than no plan. It's about being proactive. When you have a plan, even if it's not perfect, okay, it mitigates some of the chaos because it puts you in control. It allows you to retain control of a situation, dealing with the circumstances that are given to you, and that is always going to yield a better outcome than just letting life happen. And that goes for normal operations, normal life too, okay? So let's identify this event. What are we dealing with? What's the threat here? We have 2. And I think it's important we talk about both because they are 2 different things. The first is obviously coronavirus. We have this threat of transmission of a highly communicable, potentially fatal novel virus, COVID-19. I'm not a doctor. I don't work for the WHO. I'm not going to sit here and try to explain to you the actual level of what that threat is, but that is what we're dealing with. We have an illness, okay? And there are specific characteristics of what that illness is. For instance, based on the WHO's recommendations, they are advising to treat it as not an airborne illness. It is what's the word? Droplet. That it's a droplet risk. My friends and listeners in the medical profession can probably speak a lot more to this. But it's important that when we're talking about what the threat is, that we are very specific in identifying what the risk is, okay? And the risk being more to if you are a person with an immunocompromised situation, or you have other complicating factors, or you are elderly, or whatever your specific case may be that increases your risk factors for serious outcomes of contracting this virus, that's going to determine what your threat level is. Okay? And 2, we have a very also important secondary threat that's been caused by government and society's response to coronavirus. Coronavirus did not make you lose your job. Okay, mitigation efforts by the government to prevent the spread of coronavirus made you lose your job, or whatever the case is. And I'm not saying that as that I'm criticizing that measures were taken by the government to promote safety. That was not the point of that statement. But it is a separate threat and it's a separate risk, and we need to look at those 2 things separately. And then 3rd, society's response. We have a bunch of panicking people over here. I'm kind of making fun and I'm kind of not. Some people have a very good sound approach and they don't go nuts, and then you have other people who lose their minds about stuff. And I am not speaking to you as one of those 2 groups of people, but I'm saying you have to deal with those people. And that's a factor. Look at all the people hoarding the toilet paper. Is that really necessary? Is that caused by coronavirus? No, not really. That's caused by people. Okay? So we are dealing with society's response. What are your goals and responsibilities? Let's identify that. This is kind of a generalized way of looking at what your goals and responsibilities are, but it might be able to give you a little bit of a framework about what's important and what it is that we need to protect and what our level of risk is right now. Most people, like I said, are focused on their jobs. What are we doing with our kids? What are we doing with homeschool? Those are mine. I don't know what yours are. Everyone's going to have a little bit of a different situation. Maybe the health factor is a specific one for you because you have existing underlying conditions. That's going to be different for everybody. But in general, okay, this pyramid here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he was a psych person who came up with this list in pyramid form to talk about the importance of various needs, basic human needs in your life and the relative importance of those things. So the very bottom starts with physiological needs, okay, like air, safety needs, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization, works its way up to the top. So when we're talking about the threat level and prioritizing what these goals are and how you need to be focusing to meet them, it's important to keep that in mind. And it's important to take a look at the first physiological needs section, which is the very most basic level of needs that are required for humans to survive. Air, food, water, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction as a society. And it's important to note that the specific threats that we're dealing with actually do not compromise any of our fundamental basic physiological needs, okay? These are most commonly affected by natural disaster type events. Food, okay? Shelter. In a hurricane situation, your house blew away. Now you have a shelter problem. Not a factor with coronavirus, okay? All of these things are typically affected on a smaller scale level. So a natural disaster is going to be a little bit more localized, so it's not going to affect as many people, but it tends to affect that very, very basic level of things we need to survive more than what we're dealing with right now. Okay, so that's kind of a win for coronavirus here. We're not dealing with a threat to that very fundamental part of our life, okay, or needs for living. Number two is safety needs, okay? So right above this, now we're getting into some impact, okay? We have potential impact. We're going to go into each of these bullet points in a little bit more detail. We have impacts to our security, mostly from threat number two, and that's the response to and mitigation efforts, okay? That's threat two, and the virus itself is threat one. Employment, threat two. Resources, threat two. Health, that's threat one, okay? Property, potential impact, threat two, okay? What you're gonna notice too as we go through these bullet points is the health thing is probably the only fundamental need, human need we have that's actually impacted by the virus itself. It is of supreme importance, and that is why that measures have been taken by the government to try to mitigate that as much as possible. But it is important to keep that in perspective with all of the other threats that we're dealing with and impacts that we're dealing with that have to do with the response to the virus more so than the virus itself. And that has fueled a lot of discussion and debate around whether the things that we've been doing as a society and the regulations that the government has imposed are really in proportion, appropriate proportion to what the threat of the virus is itself. I'm not here to debate that today, okay? But that does put some framework around that discussion, and it kind of does make you look at it and answer and ask yourself and ask other people those questions, okay? So the threat to security and property, I'm going to put those in one, okay? The threat is primarily related to society's reaction to the virus and to the government response to the virus mitigation strategies. Specific concerns may be looting and rioting, burglary, protest, okay? And those you're going to have in the wake of any kind of crisis scenario where the public is impacted. You have people who try to take advantage of a bad situation. You have that a lot of times in natural disaster type environments where the physical security of a building or a warehouse might be compromised, and people will try to take advantage of that. Right now we have a lot of closed businesses. I haven't seen a lot of reports of looting and rioting or, of looting and burglaries yet, but that is a potential threat and that may be a concern for some people. So that's something we need to address. If it's something that impacts your particular situation, then it is something you should take a measure to address as a top priority. Because again, this is where it falls on your hierarchy of needs. That should govern what your priorities are. Strategy for dealing with those things. Oh, another specific concern may be if we end up with a resource limitation, possibility of burglarizing of personal property, personal homes, breaking into houses, if we end up with a resource situation. We do not have that yet. We don't have a specific threat to our domestic supply chain for things like food and water And a lot of what appears to be that is people's reaction, like hoarding things unnecessarily at this point. We don't have a crisis where all of the farms were flooded out and we have no way to grow food. Or a crisis where water lines that deliver, your water supply to your houses was compromised. And now there's this all of a sudden unmeetable demand for bottled water. We don't have a supply chain problem. What we're seeing in the supermarkets right now is a people problem, I think, more than anything else. And as long as it doesn't eventually turn into a supply chain problem, I don't see people burglarizing houses for resources to be on the top of the threat list with this particular threat. That can evolve over time, but based on current circumstances, no, I don't see that being the biggest problem today. Okay, how do we attack that? If these are your problems, if these are of concern to you, okay, come up with a home defense personal protection plan. It's great if you already had one of these in place, okay? A lot of people were postured to deal with emergencies to varying degrees based on how much they're into planning in advance for, for emergency situations. Some people are like, you call them doomsday preparers, right? People like that probably will never need 3/4 of the things that they are prepared to deal with. But when emergency situations come up, they're certainly more prepared than the general public. And then there's some people on the other end of that spectrum who do not think about anything in that regard and have no safety nets of any kind and have never even thought about a plan of what would happen if this happened. Do I have an escape plan if my house catches fire? Some people haven't even thought that far ahead. So everyone's kind of in a different place on that spectrum. If you planned ahead, you're in a better position. If you didn't, you're not. But we're dealing with right now. So regardless of who you are in that equation, right now, come up with a plan. If you already have one, great. If you don't, now's a good time to think about one, okay? Have a plan for what if one of those things happens. Somebody breaks into your store. Do you have your inventory secured in some way? What extra precautions can you take to do that? Okay, security systems, insurance. Okay, do you have theft insurance for any of your property, your business, your home? Okay, those are steps we can take right now to secure these problems, or to at least take a strategy to approaching them. Will everything prevent every kind of damage to you from any kind of threat? No, and that's not the point. The point is we're doing the best we can with what we have. We're identifying our weaknesses and we're trying to solve them. Okay, a logical, reasoned approach. Employment is a big one. We talk about it as employment. I lost my job. My business closed. I don't know if I'm going to have students next month. Okay, the threat isn't really employment because employment itself isn't really a hierarchical need. It is the ability to provide for yourself and for your family. And that absolutely is impacted in this situation, although not for everybody. Like I said, healthcare workers right now don't have this problem. They have other problems, not that problem though. There are certain businesses, we look at this as this horrible, horrible impact to our economy and businesses are going to close and businesses are going to fail. Well, it really depends what your business is. I can tell you Zoom stock, which we're recording on right now on this platform, their stock's gone up tremendously. They're doing extremely well. There are certain, I'm sure, healthcare, like medical equipment manufacturing businesses are thriving right now because their equipment is in demand. If you have a product that is in extreme demand right now, and it may be even more so because we're in the middle of this particular crisis, this pandemic, not every business is closing and not every employee is out of a job right now. So this is specific to, again, your circumstance, but it does have broad impact. By and large, shutting down the economy and closing what they're deeming non-essential businesses has had an impact to a broad number of people. It's also really related to society's reaction. There are people who are not spending money right now because they're concerned about their own income situations. That stops the flow of money through our economy even more. They're not buying things. Even businesses that they don't have a brick and mortar location, that are online retailers. People aren't shopping as much because they're worried about conserving their money or they already don't have it. What we need to do, the approach to this needs to be not, I don't know what I'm going to do and freak out. It's let's identify the opportunities for temporary income. Some of us have secondary skill sets or skill sets that are our primary skill sets that maybe our current job doesn't need right now, or our current business is closed, or our current job function doesn't exist. But we have transferable skills that could be used for a job that is in very high demand right now. We just talked about sectors that are hiring or are in very high demand. We have nurses probably being completely overloaded, and that seems to be the big concern with the pandemic and the whole flattening the curve thing, is because we have a system that's about to be overtaxed. If you have transferable skills, maybe you were a nurse, maybe you have that skill set, and you can apply it to some sort of job function. Function is really what we're looking for, not even a job, but a function that's in high demand due to the specific nature of the situation right now. Pivot, do that. For my business, as an example, okay, we are not able to conduct operations inside our gym. We're not an essential business. I'd like to think we are, and I think we are for certain customers. If you look at it in a certain light, as jiu-jitsu practice is mental health for people, and that's absolutely important, and I don't want to discount the importance of that. But we're not in the operating room saving lives. We're not respiratory therapists, and I get that. But if we are able to pivot our business to be able to meet the need of our customer base, or a different customer base, maybe if need be, we have an opportunity to stay viable, and that is what we're trying to do. That's what we're doing for us. I've seen that echoed throughout the business world. Manufacturing companies pivoting their operations to produce medical supplies right now because nobody's buying whatever it is they normally make, but they have production capacity to make things like masks. People need masks. If you can make masks, that's what you should be doing. Okay. Look at the stopgap relief funding that's available to your particular situation. There was a $2 trillion bill passed on March 27th and signed into law by Trump, and it was announced all these programs that are available to both businesses and individuals. Take a look at them. They are meant to be stopgap relief funding. And what that is, remember what we're dealing with here is a temporary situation, okay? This is an irregular operation. It has a start and a finish, and we're going to transition back to normal life. And taking advantage of these plans right now to ensure our sustainability long-term is not a bad thing. This isn't a long-term situation. So if taking $1,200 now is going to make an impact on our being able to provide and support our families at the other end, then those are things you should be looking at. Same thing with the SBA loan programs. There's a lot of really great options out there that are very accessible. We should be taking advantage of those things. They're there for a reason. That's not, societal welfare. That is the purpose of what I think, and I don't want to get too much into the politics side of this, but what government should do to be there in emergency, to be that safety net. It's a social safety net. This is a time where social safety net is relevant. We should be using it. That's what it's there for. It's not a long-term sustainable plan. It is a short-term stopgap measure, and it's there, and this is an appropriate time to use it. Use it, okay? The third thing, take this time now. If you were one of the people that was affected in a long-term manner, your business closed. You went out of business. You were an employee of a company that went out of business. I know there's a lot of restaurants that have shut their doors, and now those servers have no livelihoods to go back to, even when the lockdown is lifted. Use this time right now to be looking for your next move, because society's going to open back up. The lockdown's going to be lifted. People are going to go back to work, and those businesses are going to open back up and need employees. So if you are on the proactive side of things, there's going to be a lot of people who are in your position. And the more proactive you can be, spending this time right now, focusing on what you're going to do when the economy opens back up, the closer you'll be to the top of the pile in being one of the people who gets those jobs. And looking for a job is a full-time job. Most of you guys know that if you have been an employee before. Sometimes finding a job takes as much effort and focus, at least if you're trying to find a good one, as doing a job itself. So you have time right now. You were laid off, and now you're out of work, and now you need to be looking. And maybe you're not going to get hired tomorrow, and businesses are not ready to be looking for you yet, but be ready for when they are. Get your resume in order, okay? Resources. We talked a little bit about the threat is not directly to domestic supply chain. It's not directly to water lines. It's not directly to growing of food. The threat to our resources is mostly related to society's reaction to the virus and the mitigation strategies that individuals are taking. People are freaking out and hoarding the toilet paper because I don't know why. Can't figure that one out. And secondarily, it's related to actual mitigation strategies where we're being told to shelter at home and not go out of the house. So our access to resources may be limited more than it already is. It seems that the approach that the government has taken with regulation has been to keep businesses like supermarkets and stuff like that open. In the back of my mind, I'm aware that things could change. You should probably have some sort of supply of something. I'm not saying hoard all the toilet paper, but you should have a supply of something in your house just in case they had to shut everything down for 2 weeks. Like, don't be the guy that would die if that happened. Not saying it's likely that it will happen, but it's not that hard also, if you can, to fill up your pantry of non-perishable goods. We'll get into that with the strategy in a minute. Another resource that's being taxed is time and capacity, and that is on an individual level. Some of us are in a situation right now where we're balancing more jobs than we were before this happened. And again, the relevant example to me is homeschooling kids, whether it's homeschooling or just having them home full time. For those of you with younger children who were maybe in daycare before and the daycare got shut down, for you, if you have kids who are school age and in school full time and now all of a sudden they're home all the time, whether you're working or not, this is impacting your capacity to do whatever it is that you do, and it's imposing another demand on your time to have to educate. I'd imagine that there are similar examples in elder care. If you have an elderly parent who's now living with you because their facility has been shut down, I'm not sure exactly what the impacts have been, but I can imagine that there are other areas where that is a case. So strategy to deal with these threats to our resources. Okay, stock your home to the ability that you can with essential items. And this is almost more important than food because we have to think again of what the specific threat is. Prescription and over-the-counter medication and first aid. Okay, I want to talk about those two things first because we think of the risk of coronavirus as us getting the disease and having a respiratory problem, and what would the impact be of that? And we know that if it's not critical, they're going to tell us to stay at home and treat the symptoms, and if it is critical, we're going to go to the hospital. We know we have capacity issues with that. There may end up being a shortage or inability to obtain prescription and over-the-counter medication and first aid things. Okay, so if you're being told to shelter at home after you've been tested positive, the last thing you're going to want to do is have to be in a situation where you're like going out to CVS or a drugstore to try to get yourself something to deal with the symptoms of this illness. Okay, you're not critical enough to need a respirator, so they're not going to admit you to the hospital. They're going to tell you to go home. You want to have things in your house to deal with the lesser symptoms that you might be dealing with if you do test positive for this virus. Secondarily, hospitals and medical facilities are not going to have the capacity to treat other minor illnesses and injuries. If you sprain your thumb, the last place that you're going to want to go and be triaged is in an emergency room full of full-on, like, serious coronavirus cases. You're staying home with that sprained thumb. If you slice your finger, like, unless it needs to be sewn on right away, they're not going to talk to you. You're going to be waiting in line for a very long time. And the last place you want to be is like the epicenter of exposure. Like, don't go to the emergency room if you don't absolutely have to. So if it can be treated at home, let's be prepared to treat at home and stay away from those types of facilities, both for capacity reasons and just for exposure reasons. Okay. And then further than that, toiletries and non-perishable food items, and perishable to the extent that you have room to store it. You have a big freezer, load it up. Okay. Like I said, do I think that, and does it look like, based on the approach that the government has taken, that we're not going to be able to go food shopping at any point? No, I don't think so. But I can tell you my house is stocked. If I had to not go food shopping for 2 weeks, maybe my own risk, something happens with my own risk, I can track the virus and I can't go out in public for fear of exposing other people. I can definitely not leave my house for 2 weeks and I'll be fine. I'm not saying I've got everything, but I'm not going to starve to death either. Okay. Don't be that guy. With respect to time and capacity for additional job functions, identify the human and tech resources that are available to you. And you have to be a little bit creative about doing this in some regards, to support you in time management and execution of key functions. You don't have to do everything alone, even from inside your house. We have all this tech available to us right now. Reach out to the people who were providing those functions before. I cannot tell you how helpful my daughter's kindergarten teacher has been in providing us resources that are not just sending home information, but guiding us on how to efficiently communicate that information. Providing online video school. She sat and hosted and she's in kindergarten. So this, I'm sure as the kids get older, this is easier and easier to do. They did an online show and tell for an hour, and that kept her occupied. It was educational, it was engaging, and it wasn't a demand on my time. And a lot of these people that provided those functions before, they want to help. A lot of them don't know how. They don't know how to provide their function efficiently in this environment that we're in right now, any more than the rest of us do. So if you have a need and it's not being met and you need support, reach out and ask. Tell people what it is that you need, and you would be amazed at how willing they are to help you and come up with a solution together. We're all in this together, and that spirit really does exist, but you have to ask for the help. You have to reach out because they don't know what you need, okay? There are other resources available. We're all about minimizing screen time, and I think to the degree that we can do that, that's great. For some of us, that's not feasible, and right now, if we have to be leaning on online programming a little bit more to help with educating our kids, do it. The point is, let's be results oriented. Let's do what we need to do to get the job done, and then we can go back to doing it better when we have the capacity to do it, as opposed to saying, we don't want to do screen time, so we're just not going to educate our kids at all. That's not better, okay? Focus on the results, use the tech and human resources that you have available to you. Think outside the box, be creative. My son's preschool teacher, he's 3 years old. His preschool teacher has done online, like conference call type story times. And other people in the community I've seen doing this too. Those resources are out there and they engage the kids. It's face-to-face contact. It's not as good as you doing it. It's not as good as the teacher doing it in person. Not going to say that it is, but it's something, and it's better than not doing anything. And right now we need to prioritize what it is that our goals are and figure out how to get those things done to the best that we can. So use those resources that you have available to you. There is the health threat. And that's a big one. That is the one that's directly related to the virus. That is secondarily related to limited medical resources for other conditions. Like we were talking about, you're not going to the hospital with a sprained finger right now or a cut. So those are threats as well for people who have ongoing conditions that require some sort of treatment. I don't want to not address the risks to mental health also. There are absolute increases in stress. And when I talk about all of this, about having a plan, I want to reiterate that I am not saying we shouldn't have feelings and that we're not going to experience stress and we're not going to experience anxiety. I'm not pushing those things away. Those are all absolute realities. The purpose of this is let's do the best we can to mitigate that. We accept that they're there and we're still going to do the best we can. And we're going to try to mitigate that as much as we can by doing these things. It's not saying that, hey, you just follow this simple plan and you're not going to have anxiety and you're not going to have stress. This is hard. This is really hard. And I'll be the first one to say it. Like, none of this stuff is easy. And it really affects your ego to have to like go after all of these goals and maybe not be able to execute them to the best of your ability because you're just taxed, you're overtaxed, you're stretched too thin, you're trying to do too many things. That's where like prioritization comes into play. And just to focus on that, I think this really is an exercise in mental health and focusing on reducing that anxiety by having that plan in place. It's not saying that this is going to solve your problem, but it's acknowledging that it is hard and we're doing the best we can. But to try to do the best we can, don't use that as a reason to not do anything. So our strategy here, we have some personal responsibility to mitigate our own exposure to the virus. Don't be stupid. Don't be licking toilets. I hope that stopped. Don't be partying in like Florida on spring break. Don't be congregating at the beaches in public places. Like, the restrictions that the government has put into place have been put into place because people are not being smart. Like, broad stroke, not being smart. Going out in public for non-essential functions, socializing that doesn't need to be happening in person. And it's not that those things are not important. I mean, there's different degrees of recklessness. I'm not saying that going to a friend's house is the same thing as licking a toilet. Okay. But the sooner we deal with mitigating the spread, the sooner we get back to our normal life, which I think is the goal for most of us. We want to get out of this pandemic situation. So the second part of that is then compliance with the regulatory guidelines for mass mitigation of spread. There are experts who are looking at this and saying, okay, stand 6 feet apart when you're at the supermarket, out of the spray of somebody's potential sneeze. I wouldn't have known it was 6 feet. So I'm listening to these people, okay? You're not smarter than they are. You can talk about like political corruption and the political angle all you want. And yes, there are opportunists in government, in business, in society, in your personal life who are going to try to manipulate these situations in their best interest. And I'm not saying we shouldn't watch out for those things, but broad stroke, basic compliance with things that are not impacting your freedom that much is going to save us from a lot of things being imposed on us that are much, much more impactful to our freedom if we don't listen. Okay, so if you're going to go to the supermarket and they have those 6-foot squares on the floor, so keep your cart here, stand on the square. Just do it. It's not that hard. Okay, versus continuing to stand next to people and not respect that and increasing the spread. We want to mitigate where we can. Diligent preventative strategies for protecting your general health while the resources for regular care may be limited, and being prepared for self or home care of minor illnesses and injuries. Take care of your health. Stop eating crap. Keep up your exercise routine. Now is not the time to take focus off that. Boost your immunity. Do all of those things that will help you stay healthy and minimize your risk of exposure and contracting and having serious complications. God forbid you did contract the illness or any other illness. You don't want to get sick right now at all, okay? And that seems to be one of the first things that go for people is they get out of those health routines. They start comfort eating whatever's in their fridge because they're stressed out. They stop exercising because they can't go to their gym. You can't go to jiu-jitsu, so you're not getting your workout in, so you're not doing anything at all. I'm not saying the feelings that are making you do those things are not legitimate. I understand the reasoning, but the actions that you're taking in response to those feelings are making the situation worse. And I'd imagine you're going to have feelings about that too. So if you don't want to have worse feelings later, do what you can now to try to mitigate the impact. Deal with your feelings, acknowledge them. Yes, I am stressed, but I am not going to eat this gallon of ice cream right now because it's going to make things worse. And then I'm going to be really stressed about that. So again, it's just trying to maintain logic and really reason in the face of your feelings. It's not saying your feelings aren't there. They're not valid. Secure resources or plan for maintaining your mental health, self-care. This is a big one. And this is one that's important for everybody, and not just people who suffer with existing mental illness who may have limited access to their normal resources for care and maintaining their mental health. But this is for everybody. Mental health doesn't necessarily imply mental illness. Like normal people struggle. Normal's a bad word. Non-ill, non-diagnosed people suffer with mental health issues in times of stress, particularly. And this is stressful. Like I said, this is hard, and we need to look that in the face and acknowledge that and not ignore it. And it's usually the strongest of us or the people that are in leadership positions that succumb to this type of a situation the worst, because they're used to never really paying mind to their level of stress. And you need to do that. Every single one of us has a capacity, a finite capacity for stress and dealing with stuff. The strongest in our society, the ones that are in leadership roles, usually have a really high threshold for dealing with that. But there's a threshold nonetheless. And we're irresponsible, all of us, if we do not acknowledge that that is a fact and it exists and have a plan in place to deal with that and mitigate some of that stress and have a mechanism for letting that off, whatever it is, that is safe and healthy and not detrimental to other people, to prevent the pot from boiling over. Okay, you might have a really big pot, but eventually the water will boil to the top. You can't let that happen if you want to be of any use to anybody else, yourself or anybody else, especially if you care for other people, if you're responsible for other people, if you lead a business, if you are in any kind of a leadership position. You need to take care of yourself first. Okay, back to an airplane reference. Secure your own oxygen mask before you help others. If you can't breathe, you can't help. Okay, self-care is a big deal. Don't let that slide. Have a plan in place about how you're going to maintain that. Okay, the next couple of items, love and belonging. There's a lot of threats that are just based on this social distancing situation we're doing. So love and belonging, we're dealing with friendship. There's an impact there. Intimacy, family, sense of connection, esteem, respect, self-esteem. So much of this is often tied into what we are able to accomplish in our normal lives. Our entire image, our self-image, and how we view ourselves may be tied to going into a job every day and killing it and crushing it. I don't know, meeting your sales goals, whatever it is that you do that drive that inner sense of self-esteem. If you're not able to do those things right now, those things may be taking a hit. There's an absolute threat to all of this. Status, recognition, your strength, your emotional strength, your freedom, and I'm going to have a whole slide on that one. But all of those other things are very, very significantly impacted under this one umbrella of social distancing. And this is a threat to issue. It's 100% caused by the mitigation efforts, both by government and by society itself, to preventing the spread of coronavirus, threat one. Okay, social distancing is not a direct threat, and all of these things are not directly threatened by coronavirus. It's by the reaction to. Okay, so like I said, the threat is related to virus spread mitigation strategies. Prolonged isolation and shelter-at-home orders directly threaten our normal means of socializing and interacting with others. This is a thing. Okay. On the flip side, it's not a hard one to solve. Is it the same? Are we mirroring the same results? No. Having a conference call with your mom is not the same as going and hugging your mom. Okay? But we need to do something because something is better than nothing. Okay? Proactively develop alternative means of connecting. Tech-facilitated social events, networking, making use of opportunities to strengthen relationships. This is a big one. There's some opportunities here. There's some silver lining in this. And finding ways to fulfill the things that drive your sense of self are all important goals for us to be focusing on right now. This all ties back into that mental health piece too. Okay. In terms of just communicating, we have tech ways to do that. We need to go out of our way to maybe set up social events through Zoom, through other, Google Hangouts, whatever. Connection platforms. I've seen a lot of the challenges getting thrown around on social media. That's great. That's a way to stay connected. If we go out of our way to do those things, we're still staying in touch with our friends. We're still getting that level of interaction in. It's different than normal. It's not going to the gym and hanging out with your buddies. But if I'm doing push-ups over here and you're doing push-ups over there and we're all sharing and comparing, there's a connection to that. And that kind of helps meet that need a little bit, at least in a temporary stopgap bridge fashion. It's not permanent. But for now, it's better than not doing anything at all. Because absence of these things affects our mental health. Using this time to network. This is actually a really cool silver lining I found in my own business venture. It's forced me to have to learn a lot of things really fast and do a lot of things I didn't really know how to do before. And it's given me a reason to network with other like-minded people in similar situations as I am. And I've made some absolute lifelong amazing connections out of that process that will serve me for years to come. So sort of a silver lining of the whole thing. And it's been really cool going through that process. And having a reason to do that. A reason to strengthen relationships. I have seen neighbors helping neighbors. You can't find toilet paper at the store. Guess what? Neighbors are lending a roll. I have a good friend of mine who's offered other moms who are struggling to deal with having their kids at home. No, she's not offering to babysit because that's violating social distancing. But she's put out there, hey, if you guys need to run to the store and you don't want to bring your 5 kids in with you, you can't leave them in the car by yourself. But guess what? I'll come and meet you there and I'll sit in my car and they can stay in the car and I'll watch them while you go and run your errand. So there's been this overwhelming opportunity for people to reach out and offer what they can to support other people. And it's any kind of a crisis situation is an opportunity to strengthen relationships. And I've seen this in the wake of every crisis that I've been involved in, this coming together and people doing what they can to support their neighbors and their community. So that is kind of a great silver lining that happens. I saw it after 9/11 on a national level. I saw it after Hurricane Sandy on a local level. And it's cool to see that again now. And then finding ways to fulfill the things that drive your sense of self. If you are a business owner, pivot your business, do business things. Don't just close your doors and say, we're done and I don't know what to do. Okay. If you are a leader in your community, find another way to lead your people, meet their needs. Whatever drives your sense of self. If you are an awesome parent and like that's your thing, that's what makes you tick, and you derive the sense of, and you're super proud of that. You know, I'm sure you're killing homeschooling right now. Share that with other people. And it's going to give you this return, this emotional return, as you're helping other people meet their needs. So there's ways to fulfill that sense of self that maybe are impacted in the way you normally do that. But a crisis situation always yields opportunities to find those things to do. And I said I was going to leave a whole slide for freedom, and this is important. There's a couple things we need to address and talk about here. And kind of why this whole discussion that we're having tonight is important. The threats to our freedom, the mitigation strategy itself, the short-term regulatory actions are 100% impacting our freedom. We're being told not to leave the house. That's a big deal. We are a country of people that is used to going out and doing whatever the heck we want for the most part. And now we're being very, very directly told we can't do that. We can't do most of the things that we normally do. So that is a huge threat and impact. I'll say impact more than threat to our freedom right now. Other threats to our freedom in a longer term sense, because those are impacts that I think are reasonable because they have a result, or at least debatably reasonable. We're doing that to mitigate the threat of the spread of coronavirus, or to slow the spread. Other threats to our freedom, which are things that we need to take direct action on and consider, are this mass public non-compliance of reasonable actions. What do you think is going to happen as a result of mass non-compliance of government recommendations and suggestions to stay home? If people aren't doing it, the regulations are going to tighten. They're going to get tighter. We're going to lose more freedoms because of it. If we can't be responsible, this is why we can't have nice things. Okay? And that is a risk not that we maybe can't directly mitigate, but it is a risk to us by the rest of society. And we're going to have to deal with those threats and that further impact if that happens. This is a big one. Long-term threats from overreaching preventative regulatory measures for future incident. There's a quote by Rahm Emanuel that government has a propensity to never let a serious crisis go to waste. And actually his quote wasn't specific to government, but I'm throwing that in there. People in general, never let a serious crisis go to waste. Okay. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think the government conspired to create coronavirus to bring down sex trafficking circles. If you read, I fall down the rabbit hole sometimes. I read. I don't think that's the case, but I think that politicians in general, and there's businesses and there are people in every walk of life who will be opportunists in the wake of a crisis. And the way that rolls out with government is it becomes an excuse playing upon people's fears rather than logic to take away freedom. Because a government can best manage a situation the more control that it has and control the results. The more control that it has, the less freedoms the people have, the more control they have over the results. There's a balance between that our freedom and their level of control and ability to control an outcome. Okay. So our strategies for approaching this, let's talk about this kind of big picture here. There's an inverse correlation, like I just said, between personal responsibility and increased regulations reducing freedom. So if we're responsible and we just stay the heck home because we know it's a good idea, we don't have to have the government, big government, come out and tell us to do it. And if we leave it in the hands of big government to tell us what to do, we're going to end up with less freedom than if we were just using common sense and staying home to begin with. So do your part. Okay. And convey that to other people too. If you see your friend being an idiot, doing something that is compromising that on a mass scale and not being personally responsible, call that out. Because the more people that don't behave responsibly, that is where government steps in and imposes regulations on us and has a more justified reason for doing so, because we can't be trusted, because we don't make the best decisions for ourselves. And if we're proving that fact, then they kind of have an argument there. Let's take away that argument. Be personally responsible. The second piece of this is we need to not fall into the mindset that government control is the right answer, that we're going to give up our freedom so government can control this problem for us. That comes a lot from that personal freedom mentality, but also the realization that what are we trading? Government can't prevent coronavirus at all. Like, they can't stop the spread. Can they do a better job of controlling the spread if we were in a dictatorship situation and we gave them all of our freedoms and we enacted martial law and they were enforcing curfews in the streets? Yeah, probably. But is that worth it? And this isn't a discussion of, we've as a society kind of, and this is sort of a global thing in the last 5 years, I've seen us move to this false dichotomy of polarizing every issue with, you either want old people to die or, you want everyone to live. And it's not that. It's like, you don't care about economic freedoms and freedoms or health. It's not like one or the other. There's a balance, and we have to make sure that when we are giving up some of our freedom, and I mean that even just by making a personal choice to stay home. I'm not going out. I'm not going to restaurants. I'm not going out in public unnecessarily. That's worth the risk to me because I'm trying not to get coronavirus. Like, there's a benefit to that. But to give up all of our freedoms to a government or, to a situation like that where we're not, the threat outweighs the risk. You have to balance whether or not the threat and the risk are balanced. There's a quote by Ben Franklin that gets thrown around a lot. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And I don't want this podcast to turn into a big political discussion, but I think it's prudent that we always remember that we are operating from a place of reason and logic, and make sure that whatever freedoms that we're giving up, we're not doing so casually without balancing the actual impact and mitigation of risk. And if we can achieve that mitigation of risk in another way without giving up our freedoms, we should do that. That there is value to preserving that freedom. That's who we are as a country and as a society. And that should always be a consideration. The final point in Maslow's hierarchy is the self-actualization. This is a very temporary situation. I don't really consider this as being compromised unless you let this very temporary situation turn into a permanent one by not having a plan. And there's plenty of social safety nets in place that I think are going to catch a lot of people who don't have plans, and that's okay. So I don't see that being a direct threat or this directly threatened by this particular situation that we're dealing with. I just wanted to touch again on silver linings of the situation. It was my last bullet point in the first slide there, identifying the opportunities that this event affords us and figuring out ways to capitalize on them. These may not be first priorities, but these are the little things that are available to you right now that are probably not under normal life circumstances. And you're not going to die without them, but you're going to be really sorry later if you look back on this time and you'll be like, damn, I missed an opportunity there. Okay? Time is a big one. Not for everybody. Not all of us have a lot of free time right now. I don't. But some of us do. This is a great opportunity to pick up a new hobby, or I don't know, organize your closet, spring clean, cook a new recipe, clean out your garden. I don't know what it is on everybody's to-do list, but I know I have one a mile long that if I had a bunch of free time right now, man, I would love to knock some of those things off, those projects that you just never get around to. Use the time. You have time. You may never be in that position again where we're just being forced to sit in our house and do nothing for some of us. Do something. You have this opportunity. You may never see it again as an adult. Family time. I'm not saying you have to love every minute. There is definitely a downside to just being in close quarters with your family for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and having no break. And it's definitely quantity right now, and quality over quantity is a big deal. But you know what? Maybe in our daily lives under normal circumstances, we don't get to see our family for dinner every night. Relaxing of schedules, that goes into that. I can tell you, not having to get my kids up in the morning to put them on a bus, been kind of nice. We're still doing schoolwork. We're still doing schooling. It's challenging. It's hard, but you know what? It's been really nice to sleep in and have like morning snuggles until 8 a.m. every day. And that's not something we get under normal circumstances. So I'm trying to like focus and appreciate on those opportunities. You know, again, like if you normally work a job where you're not home to have dinner with your family every night, appreciate that. You might not get that again on the other side of this. Don't let your stress in this situation stop you from appreciating what those things are. Change of pace, develop new skills. This is a great opportunity, whether you have a ton of time or you're forced to do it because of trying to meet these other goals that you have. I have learned so much in the last 3 weeks about tech things that I just never made the time to focus on. But now I've had to. I'm in a position where the viability of my business depended on it. And the viability of my children's education depended on it. So all of my goals depended on me learning new things to be able to do those things. And I'm a smarter person for it. I'm a more educated person for it. And those skills that I've developed will serve me in other aspects of my life. So I kind of have to be thankful that this situation pushed me to learn those skills and develop myself as a person. And we're going to wrap up here with some parting words. I think I've said it a couple times. Give yourself some grace, okay? Like I said before, you are not judging yourself by your ability to execute perfectly right now, and perfect may not even be a possible achievable goal in a lot of these regards. Depending on what your particular life circumstances are and what your particular goals are and how this is impacting you and your family very specifically. It's going to be different for everybody. You may not be able to provide the same level of income through any of those means that I talked about versus your normal operations time. And this is not meant to be a blueprint to say that if you do all these things, then you should have no anxiety, no stress, and your life is hunky-dory. It's not that. It's not that at all. And that's not my point of this podcast and everything I'm talking about here. The most important thing that I want you guys to take away from this is give yourself some grace, okay? Your normal life operations have likely taken you years and years of practice and refining to develop the most efficient, effective, and fulfilling ways to meet your personal goals and responsibilities. You have engineered your life for your entire life. And it's a work in progress and you're always tweaking it. And maybe that wasn't even perfect yet. Most of us, it probably wasn't. Mine's not. You know, I think most of us always have things we can continue to work on. But to whatever degree we were achieving and meeting those goals and responsibilities, that was a process we developed over time. And right now we are 3 weeks into a very different life situation. You can't expect to achieve your goals and responsibilities with the exact same results of processes you've taken a lifetime to develop. It's not remotely reasonable for anybody to expect that. So if the crisis solution isn't as great, that's okay. Approach each goal with the attitude that anything you are doing to maintain it is better than letting the crisis derail it entirely. Fly your plane. There's intrinsic value in staying in the routine of paying it attention anyway, as it will make the transition back to normal life easier on the other side. I'm going to throw this right out there for my jiu-jitsu people. I want you guys in the live virtual classes. Do I think it's the same as you coming into the gym and rolling with each other on the mat? Heck no. If I did, I would have been doing that a long time ago. But it's important if jiu-jitsu is in your life that you stay in the routine of keeping it in your life. It's for you. It's for when this is lifted after not doing it for 3 months. Have any of you guys ever been out with an injury before? I have. if you don't keep jujitsu in your life while you're out, it's really hard to come back. It's more effort on the other side to come back than if you kept it in the routine the whole time. And I've seen guys go out with knee injuries, back injuries, and they're down for 6-8 weeks, sometimes, 9 months to a year. I've torn both of my ACLs. I'm no stranger to like long-term injury, and I've had 2 kids. So that is, a medical reason to be off the mats for an extended period of time. And it was key for me. It was critical to keep jujitsu and practice in my like field of vision. And that was what made it possible for me to jump right back in after. You have guys who get hurt and they still show up to the gym every class and they sit on the side and watch and they learn the techniques and they watch other people roll, and that there's benefit to that. It keeps it in the forefront of your mind. You will benefit anyway, or at least it prevents regression to some degree. And then as soon as you are given the green light, you can jump right back in and you really didn't miss a beat. You will be far ahead of anyone who kind of just went, well, I can't roll, so I'm not going to do jujitsu at all. Don't do that. Don't do that with anything in your life. Jujitsu is just one example because of who I am and who most of my audience is here and what you guys do and what we do. But that applies to everything in your life. If it's working out and you can't get to your gym right now and lift, do something else, even if it doesn't achieve the exact same result, even if you're not going to make the strength gains doing, body weight workouts at home as you would going into a gym and lifting heavy weights. Do it anyway, because it's better than not doing it at all, and it makes your transition back easier. There is no perfect or objective standard of completion. We're not competing with each other here. There's not like me judging myself against you, judging myself against that guy, because we all have very unique circumstances, and we all have unique goals and responsibilities that are specific to us. So the objective here, the title of this podcast was Optimizing Your Pandemic, okay? It's doing the best you can based on your very individual and particular set of circumstances. The best you can is the best you can. Don't we want to be the best that we can? That's not imposing some external level of achievement on you. That's saying, let's make this the best situation that we can with what we have. That attitude will always yield better results objectively than an attitude of resignation where we let what we can't do stop us from doing what we can. And that's a message I want to leave you guys with. I want you to apply that to every aspect of your life. Don't be limited by not being able to be way up here. If you can work really hard and get here, and if you do nothing at all, you'll be here. Because I'd rather be here than here. And not being able to be here isn't a good reason not to do this. Do what you can with what you have, and that will be the absolute best that you can do. And you should have peace in your life at night and be able to go to sleep at night, knowing that you did everything you could. You leave nothing in the ring. I'm going to make a fight reference here. If you give it everything you've got, you can't ever be disappointed about the outcome. Doesn't mean you can't have feelings, but it means you know there was nothing more that you could do. And I think if you apply those principles, I gave you fighting and flying. That's kind of who I am. That's what I've done mostly. I have some other hats that I've worn, and I'm sure I'll throw those references out at you in other podcasts later on. Fighting and flying principles are great for applying to a pandemic management situation. So do the best with what you have, and good luck. Reach out to the resources that you have. I'm one of them, guys. I want to be that for you, and I'm trying to be that. I'm doing what I think I can do. But if there is more that your local jiu-jitsu gym can do for you and your coach can do for you, please let me know that, because that's what I'm trying to figure out too. I'm navigating this just like you guys are. Stay positive, stay safe, stay healthy. Don't catch the corona. And I really, really, really hope to see you guys back on the mats. The day they drop that lockdown, our doors will be wide open. We're going to have this awesome gym for you guys to come into. I am making this the best I possibly can for you guys to come back. I want everyone to be as excited as I am, because it's going to be cool. And this isn't going to last forever, and life's going to be awesome again. And we're just going to make it as awesome as we can be. So let's just get over this bridge and see you guys on the other side. Have a great night.